Hello viewers, welcome to this video. This video I'm going to be going through my 10 favourite Pat Metheny albums. Now, it hasn't gone well, so this is my third attempt to do this. I want to catch it all in one take. I want this to just be a raw one when it goes up and it keeps going wrong. So I'm a bit miffed at the moment. So I thought I'd explain that if I seem a bit grumpy at the start. It's not you, I'm not grumpy with you. I'm not grumpy with anybody. I'm just grumpy with myself for not being able to get my act together and get this bloody done right. You know, really cocked up. You know I never stop. But I bloody cocked up on this one. So what does my 10 favourite albums mean? What it means is that I have taken them from my own personal collection of Pat Metheny albums. That's what I've done. I pulled out my 10 favourites. This is not me doing a sort of an objective ranking, although I'm objectively ranking the one. Oh, why? So we just get on with it. It's bloody my favourite my 10 favourite Pat Metheny albums. What am I explaining it for? Bloody hell. We're all right. This isn't going well at all. Am I just starting? No, you're not starting again, Andy. You know the last reason why I stopped? The reason I stopped on the last one is because I'm starting and I realised that collar was doing that. I thought I don't want to go through looking like a fool, so I've started again. And now it's got to the point where I know I can't go forward unless I express the fact that it's not going well. I got here early as well and I've wasted time, and I hate when I waste time. At number 10 on my list of my favourite Pat Metheny albums, I have this album, which is called Sign of 4. And it's the more avant-garde end of Pat, right? Pat Metheny is not only one of the greatest guitarists and composers in the sort of jazz rock world, you know, over the last 50 years or so. He's also one of the biggest selling. And he is a big seller because throughout the 80s, he made some very approachable and melodic and yet, you know, artistically heavy albums. He was able to do both. And I think the reason for that is because Pat Metheny comes out as an improviser partly out of the sort of harmonic approach of Ornette Coleman. In other words, something that's much closer to free jazz than you would think. And when you listen to Pat Metheny albums, often there is a place on these very melodic albums where there's a place where he explores that. In the 90s, he started to really explore the more avant-garde end of his influences. And he made an album called Zero Tolerance for Silence, which I haven't chosen. I own it. It's one of the ones that didn't make the list. I'll be talking about those at the end of the video. I wanted to put that one on, but I thought if you really want to hear the extreme free end of what Pat does, but in a way which is still accessible, you have to go for this album, Sign of 4. For me, what Pat Metheny is exploring on Zero Tolerance for Silence is the idea of anti-music. How to play without being empathetic. You know, what happens when you reduce all those things that you have as a crutch as a musician? What do you end up with? Here, we have two duos that are playing together. And they are trying to play with each other. So this is the joy of music in its rawest form, right? We have two duos. We have a duo that's made up of Pat and his drummer at the time, Paul Wertico. And we have another duo that's made up of Greg Bendian and the great free improvising guitarist Derek Bailey. The way it's mixed is that we have Greg and Pat on the one side and Paul Wertico and Derek Bailey on the other side. It's an incredible album, this is. If I open it up and show you inside as we open this album up, this is why we do this, so we can actually look at the actual albums. And there we see the 3 discs there, yellow, red and blue. So the first disc is called Statement of the Case. Second disc is called The Science of Education. And the third one is The Balance of Probability. So it seems like we have a dialectic there. I won't go into that. I want to, but I won't. And it starts off with this disc with a track on this one called A Study in Scarlet, which is 62 minutes long. This is a heavy album. So that's what I've got at number 10. Sign of 4, Pat Metheny, playing alongside Greg Bendian, who has been on the channel, Paul Wertico, who has been on the channel, and Derek Bailey, who hasn't been on the channel, but his best mate Ben Watson has. So I think I've covered all that. But the one person who hasn't been on the channel is Pat Metheny. If you're watching, Pat, you know, give me a message. I want to interview you. You've been on loads of other music YouTubers' channels and done interviews. You know, at some point you need to go on the best. That's all I'm going to say. I know that I was taking the mickey out of you on Saturday, would say that you should get a haircut now, that you are no longer young enough to sport the loving flowing locks that we see on some of the 70s and 80s albums. That period of time has gone for you, and all I'm saying is I would get a haircut. Same thing happened to me. You know, I have long flowing locks on the beginning of this YouTube, if you want to go back that far. But at some point, I knew I had to get my hair cut. But me waxing on about Pat Metheny's hair is not what you came for, is it? You came for me to talk about my favourite albums. And we've done number 10. So what have you got at number 9? As you know, I will be a fan of this one because it's improvised. I love improvisation. I'm fascinated by improvisation. I believe that improvisation is the source of creativity, and creativity is sourced in improvisation. I also feel that the greatest group that he ever had was called the Pat Metheny Group, and it had Paul Vertigo on drums. So I'm going to call that, there's the Paul Vertigo Group, there's the Dan Gottlieb Group before that, and then you've got the Antonio Sanchez Group after that. My favourite of those is the Paul Vertigo Group. We will be talking about the reasons for that in a minute, I think. In 1996, just before Paul left, they recorded this incredible album called Quartet. This is, in some places, completely improvised or mostly improvised. There's some very, you know, basic charts on some of them. I just absolutely love this album. They're playing predominantly acoustic instruments. I think Pat plays a little bit of electric guitar and Lalmez has got an electric piano. But on the whole, what you're hearing is acoustic. And it's the basis of that group. We've got Pat Metheny on guitar, Lalmez on piano, Steve Robdy on acoustic bass, and Paul Vertigo on drums. That quartet there forms, I think, one of the greatest jazz groups of the 1980s and 90s. That is about as good as it gets. All virtuoso musicians, but also so empathetic to Pat's vision, and also all of them able to repress their egos. This is what mastery of the instrument is. The great masters don't need to do that. I need to do that when I play. I have to need to show off that I can play. I'm always doing that. Paul Vertigo is a player that's gone beyond that. He is an incredible player. I saw the Pat Metheny Group live, both with Paul Vertigo, and the virtuosity of his drumming was unbelievable. Now, Antonio Sanchez came in, and he is much more of an Antonio Sanchez type player. We listened to Antonio Sanchez. Paul Vertigo was able to appear and disappear. And his double flat ride approach, which he's a master of, meant that he could improvise very freely, but occupy a certain place in Pat's music, which I miss. I think it was an integral part. That flat ride tick, that knitting needle cymbal sound is integral to Pat Metheny's vision. So Quartet is a wonderful album. Here I am now going to go to the big daddy of Pat's more free improvised albums. As I said, Pat came out of the Ornette Coleman School of Improvisation, which will give you a clue what I've got at number 8 now. Well, I'll show you it this anyway. It's this one. Look at that. Love the cover as well. Just getting the thumbnail. That's a cool thumbnail, isn't it? Pat Metheny came out of the Gary Burton band. As a young practicing guitarist, Pat was obsessed with Gary Burton. Gary Burton, not much older than Pat, well, you know, say how much older, about 10 years older. But Gary Burton had emerged at a very young age as a virtuoso vibraphone player. So he's one of the first musicians of that generation that grew up listening to the Beatles, and he's the first musician to really integrate the Beatles into his sound, thus laying the groundwork for all of jazz rock. Now, his compositional approach didn't really take off, and bands like the Mahavishnu Orchestra then stepped in, and that was the overarching sound until Pat Metheny came out of the Gary Burton band and signed to the same label, ECM, and started to utilise this compositional approach, which wasn't just Gary Burton. Keith Jarrett was exploring it, Steve Swallow was exploring it, you know, Carla Bley was exploring it, there's a whole bunch of musicians. They were, for me, are really rooted in the sort of songwriting approach of the Beatles, although, or at least that plays a part in it. Signing to ECM meant he was playing under Manfred Eicher's, you know, vision, which was to make albums very quickly and cheaply, but with a very high production value, utilising techniques that we use to record classical ensembles, i.e. in the room playing together, and a sort of microscopic, you know, approach to recording them. Pat's sort of more, I would say, progressive rock urges of wanting to do big scale compositions, you know, and all these different things he wanted to do. He felt hemmed in, I think. So he moves out to Geffen Records, which was a much bigger label, major label, doing a lot of pop acts at the time. So we all expected something that was going to be very much more commercial at that time. And Pat was, at this point, ready to go. He's selling records, jazz instrumental records, and they're selling like 250,000 copies each. This is incredible. He's one of the great commercial artists of the 1980s. Signs to Geffen Records, has all the push that Geffen can offer, so we all went running out to get this one, didn't we, in 1986 when it came out. And a lot of Pat Metheny fans must have taken this home and been bemused, me included. I was 18 at the time, took this home and I didn't get it. Didn't get Ornette Coleman, and I didn't get this. I knew who Ornette Coleman was. I had the Skies of America video, if you know what that is. So I'd listened to him. I'd heard Primetime. I think that Ornette's jazz rock band in the 80s, Primetime, is one of the most important bands of the 1980s. And so this is why I'm telling you all about this, because Pat really brings Ornette Coleman to the fore at this point. What we have on here, I believe, is one of the greatest embodiments of the harmonologic approach, played by 5 incredible players. Alongside Ornette Coleman and Pat Metheny, we've got Charlie Hayden on bass, who had played with Pat before, but was also a member of the classic quartet that Ornette Coleman had in the late 50s. And he's playing alongside Jack DeJohnette, who, for me, is one of the greatest jazz drummers that's ever lived, and embodies all the incredible attributes of free jazz drummers, Elvin Jones, Tony Williams, and Ed Blackwell, and all those guys in Jack DeJohnette. But Jack DeJohnette's also got the fire of fusion in there. He really is an incredible drummer, and he's playing alongside Donardo Coleman. Now, Donardo Coleman is Ornette's son. He was pulled onto an Ornette Coleman album in the late 60s when he had just started playing drums, and you had really naive child playing the drums on a jazz album, which created a furore in the jazz world. By this point, I think Donardo's grown into a very strong drummer. He's playing a lot more electronic drums on here. But Donardo Coleman has got to be one of the few drummers that really understands the harmonic process, if you can understand it, that is. This is a masterpiece. It's a difficult album. I can remember I put it on and I got to Endangered Species, which is a long track, and I just didn't get it at all. Then I turned it over and then I put on Video Games, and it was listening to Video Games that I got it, because suddenly Jack DeJohnette just starts to swing, and he swings so hard, and then Ornette kicks in, and it's just Charlie Hayden, Jack DeJohnette, and Ornette is swinging so hard that I didn't understand it. Pat's not swinging on it. He is swinging, but he is much more like this virtuoso, writhing beast. The lines that he plays, they wrap round, Ornette Coleman. They're all over the place. He's going in 3 dimensions at once. It's as though someone's opened a portal to the 4th dimension. It's incredible what Pat's doing on here. Incredible album. These are all incredible albums. So that was at number 8, wasn't it? At number 7, I thought, what album really is my favourite from a guitar point of view? And it's this one here. John Scofield and Pat Metheny, I Can See Your House From Here, which also features the aforementioned Steve Swallow on electric bass and acoustic bass guitar, and the great Bill Stewart on drums, one of my favourite drummers of the last few decades. John Scofield, of course, was the other great visionary jazz rock guitarist of the 1980s. You could stick Mike Stern in there and Scott Henderson. I think we got all four. I'm a huge fan of Scofield. And Scofield is a post-Ornette Coleman harmonic style guitar player. But he's so dirty and bendy, and he's got the blues running through his system, whereas Pat was much more sort of that clean tone, Wes Montgomery style, isn't he? So that'd be interesting to see that come together. But they sort of meet in the middle. And it was a shock to me on some of these tracks. Pat's got a little bit of distortion, and he seems to be bending the notes. It's an incredible place. He's also played guitar synth on certain points. Tracks like Everybody's Party, the red one, they're great. The red one is one of Pat Metheny's great compositions. This is one of my favourite Pat Metheny albums. It's just a quartet. They're just playing, and Pat Metheny, you feel like the sort of the straitjacket of leadership is off him a bit. He's just with his mate, and they're just playing guitars together. Scofield's great on here. It's wonderful. And I have to say, there's certain moments when Pat Metheny out Scofield, it has to be said, because Pat Metheny can do anything. He can do anything, that man. Right, as I said, when he came to ECM Records, he recorded a debut, which wasn't a big success at the time, but has gone on to become one of the greatest jazz or jazz rock albums in history, which is this one. Now, I did think, should I put this at number one? Because objectively, I know how great this album is and how important it is. But it wasn't a success at the time. And what we have on here is, this does not represent Pat Metheny. The albums that followed this up, like Watercolors and then the Pat Metheny Group and American Garage, he forges something which becomes his signature sound. But this is about this trio. And this trio of Pat Metheny on guitar, Bob Moses on drums, one of the most underrated jazz drummers on the planet, and Jaco Pastorius on bass. This is a hell of a... It's a one-off, isn't it? It's a one-off. I believe there's that Bruce Ditmas album where Jaco and Pat are playing together, and Pat doesn't sound like Pat. He's a lot more closer to what you would expect of a normal fusion in the early 70s before he'd got his more signature sound. Pat was 21 years old on this. I think Jaco was 20 when they recorded this, 75. He would have been 24. It's incredible. The only issue I have with this album is I believe that this was a much more muscular trio than this album makes out, and the Manfred Eicher sound came in and took a little bit of the fire away from this. It's a little cerebral in its sound. Jaco sounds in a very cerebral place, and I don't believe that was what was happening anyway. That's a minor grumble. It's still a masterpiece. It's still a masterpiece, and so that's what we've got. Number 6, or 5, was it? Number 6. So at number 5. Oh, now, I have been exploring the more improvisatory end of Pat on these earlier albums, but I do love his huge, epic masterpieces where you get everything and the kitchen sink thrown in. I love these albums. And what we have now is 5 of these in ascending order of my love. But this album, I could easily have any of these 5 at number 1. This is the last album I think he did with the Pat Metheny Group on ECM Records, and it occupies a special place for that. It's First Circle. It sort of introduces the second band, which is Pat Metheny, Lowell Mays, Steve Robbie, Pedro Aznar doing vocals and all that Latin percussion, and the great Paul Wertico on drums. This is a wonderful album. I bought it at the time, so we have the inner sleeve. I don't know how many people still have that now, but I've still got it. I've taped it actually to my thing. The great Lowell Mays. Look at them, how young they are now, and he's gone. This album's absolutely brilliant. Let's go through it track by track, because I think we need to do that, or at least a few of the tracks. It opens up with Forward March, which actually foreshadows the opening on of the album, The Way Up, where they're all playing weird sort of marching instruments. On the beginning of The Way Up, they play toy instruments. So Lyle Mays is playing the trumpet, Steve Robdy is playing a bass drum, Pedro is playing glockenspiel, and Paul Vertigo is playing like a marching drum cymbal, and Pat's on synclavier and guitar. Very strange track, short, and then we go into Yolanda You Learn, and this is that sound that's going to sell hundreds of thousands of records. It's absolutely melodic, beautiful, highly composed, rich. The soloing not just being spots for people to burn, but the solos being part of the composition in a sort of Duke Ellington style. Absolutely incredible. And then we get the epic first circle. If you're a progressive rock fan, you have to listen to these tracks. That is incredible, the way it goes. And then at the end, we have If I Could. And If I Could it's just one of those sublime moments. It's so delicate. They must have just captured something in the studio. It's absolutely beautiful. It's just so delicate and precise, and there's so much yearning in there, which hadn't been in jazz rock in the 70s. Turn It Over, and there's the very approachable Tell It All, which has some incredible Pat Metheny-esque guitar playing on it. And then we get End of the Game, Masala, that's great, and Praise, all great stuff. I always felt it drops off a little bit at that point, but only slightly. This is a wonderful album. It's the end of the ECM years. It heralds this new band. Who's produced this? Let's have a look. Produced by Pat Metheny. Oh, there must have been a tussle, because usually on an ECM album it would say produced by Manfred Eicher. But of course, by that point, ECM Records existed because of Pat Metheny, because he sold records, and Keith Jarrett, because he'd sold 6 million copies of the Colin concert. Right, so what do I have at number 4? We have the aforementioned Way Up. This has got a lot of notes. It's a very clinical. I'm not so keen on the Antonio Sanchez band. I think Antonio Sanchez overplays a little bit. He's a virtuoso drummer, but I don't know. It's just a lot of rattliness, and I don't know. Not so keen on it. But it's an incredible album. This is one track through composed, which is 68 minutes long, as you can see. If I can get it the right way around, if I can get it the right way up, yeah, you get it, you get it. Pat Metheny, Lamas on acoustic piano, Steve Robdy on bass, Kyung Vu on trumpet, Gregor Barrett on harmonica, and Antonio Sanchez on drums. I think we've got a few guests on here. Probably got this wrong, and I probably shouldn't have gone in, but at least I get to show you this cover, which features this long line of different posts. A little bit like that game when you draw a picture and you give it to your mate and you open it up, suggesting that there's a through line through this composition, which of course there is. Very simple note almost goes through this. Yes, we've got Dave Samuels on percussion, the late great Dave Samuels, and of course the incredible Richard Bonner on percussion and voice. I knew that was the case. They're two legends. Absolutely incredible album. You have to sit down and listen to it all the way, or you won't understand it. You have to sit down and experience it. He hasn't padded it out with long solos like you'd expect. These solos, as I said, occupy a certain space in these compositions. It never lets up. It's so complex. And I know people who went out on the tour and saw it. I could have seen it, and I regret not, because they said it was astonishing. The band started up with their sort of toy introduction, actually in the audience, and walked up onto the stage, assembled, and then played this hour-long piece in front of their very eyes. Astonishing. Astonishing. The incredible achievements you could have with musicians playing together. There's a lost art. Like I said, he signs to Geffen Records, and he makes a bunch of really approachable, commercial, easy listening almost, but incredibly heavy and artistically rich albums. There's a whole bunch of albums you could pick to represent that period, My favourite is this, Still Life Talking, and the reason is because it's got Third Wind on it. Again, another progressive jazz rock masterpiece, absolute masterpiece. And I think Pat does his two greatest guitar solos. He does an incredible post-Wes Montgomery, Pat Metheny clean tone, solo. And he does a synclavier solo. I've got a story about this. It's an incredible album, incredible tune. I used to have a mate called Timmy Vegas. He's now a dance music producer, but he's also a very good jazz pianist. And he played with me in the band with Robert Plant. I know Tim now for 30 odd years. He now lives out in Vietnam, where he has surprisingly become a bit of a TikTok star, but that's by the by. I can remember I was teaching in a college and Tim was teaching in the room next door. And I put on this track. So I'm sat there and the students are listening to this. They're being blown away by this track. They're music students. I'm educating them in the right way, playing them amazing music. And it gets to that synclavier solo. Suddenly the door bursts open and Tim runs in. Now, Tim was teaching on the dance music course next door, but he jumps up on the table and he mimes. He mimes the guitar solo, and it's like note for note. And there's a point where Pat stops playing. There's like a little gap, and Tim mimes sort of going up to the amp, and he fixes it, and then he comes back in with the next line. And the students were sat there like up, entertained, bemused, and wondering how the guy that was teaching, sort of DJ production, knew this Pat Metheny album note for note. But there's a thing we need to say about this. That this album also influenced another guy that was a contemporary of mine who was working in Wolverhampton around about this time, doing graffiti art and all sorts of stuff, the drum and bass and jungle producer Goldie. Goldie went on holiday, took this album with him, listened to it, and came back and made the incredible album Timeless, which is a masterpiece of drum and bass. This is how these albums work. This is how the influence works. I just love this album. So that's what I got at number 3. At number 2, this was originally number 1. This is sort of this is like, the Pat Metheny sound. The thing we're talking about. It's on here. It's on First Circle. It's on Still Life Talking. For me, he never ever surpassed it more than on this album. This is one of the greatest progressive rock albums of the early 90s, if not the 90s, if not the last 30 or 40 years. When did it come out? 97 to mid-90s. This is called Imaginary Day. It's a little bit like a musical version of James Joyce. It sort of encapsulates a day. We have this code on the cover, and all the sort of notes are in this code, very prog, all the notes in this code. When we open the album up, we have the code on the actual album, all right? And from this, you have the letters here. And by deduction, you could sort of sit that into there, not just use the CD to listen to, but you could actually work out the code, right? Knowing that says Pat Metheny. What would it be? Group, Imaginary Day. So I did that, sat listening to this album as I went into this incredible world. This is one of his most eclectic albums. It's just unbelievable. Roots of Coincidence might be Pat's finest moment, and it's not what you expect. That's got elements of jungle and drum and bass. There's elements of heavy metal in there, indie rock. There's elements of orchestral music, modern classical music. That is incredible. The whole thing is incredible. Pat's guitar playing is also off the scale on this. He's playing fretless guitar. He's got distortion. He's got his clean tone. There's synth. This for me is Pat's greatest album. Absolutely incredible. That is for me Pat's greatest album. But I haven't got it at number 1 because what I've got at number 1 is something else, and I'm going to try and explain why this album is so important to me. This is the first Pat Metheny album I bought. I discovered Pat Metheny in the 1980s. He was on Whistle Test, which was quite surprising that he'd have a jazz artist on Whistle Test, which was a revamp of the old grey Whistle Test in the 1970s. And they covered him extensively. They did a little documentary on him, which I recorded. And they brought him into the studio and he played a tune called Are You Going With Me, which was this incredible build-up tune. LaMail comes in and he plays this sort of Stevie Wonder-esque, you know, harmonica sounding solo on keyboard, which builds up to a certain point, very controlled, and then Pat takes over and then he takes you off into this incredible world. So I went and bought that album. I was egged on because I also read that this had won the Grammy for Best Album, so I went and bought this, Offramp. This album was where I fell in love with Pat Metheny, and to this day, I think what we have here is the incredible 70s Dan Gottlieb group, which had done these incredible albums, Pat Metheny group, American Garage, and then you get this. And this is like the climax of that group, and it's a wonderful group. Pat Metheny's brought the synclavier in, and on here, because I put it on the other day, you know, just to make sure I was right to put it at number one. This just has a sound for me. It has a sound which is so Pat Metheny. It's so there. It's so right. It's just, the compositions are so rich, and yet it's suffused with a new aesthetic that we hadn't heard in jazz rock fusion before, and we hadn't heard it in jazz. Baccarolle is like possibly a statement of intent. Pat Metheny's played guitar synth on, and it comes in, it's got like a sort of 1980s drum machine sound, and it comes in and it's very harmonic, but it's also got these static loops in there. It's written by Metheny, Mays and Vasconcelos, Nana Vasconcelos on the percussion, primarily Burimbu, who's incredible, the late great Nana Vasconcelos. It's a statement. It's not an easy listen. It's not an easy listen, but it's not free jazz either. It's compositional. It's interesting. It's a statement. I can't even say what it is style-wise. Then, of course, we go into the aforementioned 8-minute Are You Going With Me? It is just, it's just so beautiful. I'd forgotten about it. I've heard it for so many years. I mean, I bought this album when it was 84, 85. I've been listening to this for 40 years, so I haven't listened to it, put it on again, and I was just like, oh my God, this is Pat Metheny. This is, I mean, I just said Roots of Coexistence, but this is the defining tune of Pat Metheny. See, this is the point. When you get to this album, there's something about this album. Then we have Olay, very beautiful tune, a European sound in that. 8 minutes long, incredible, very beautiful. And so we get this sort of quite way out tune, and then it's all beauty for the rest of side one. Turn it over, and we get 18, and 18 is that commercial sound. It's almost like a pop song, but it's still so rich. It doesn't fall into sort of trying to be a disco record. It doesn't like try and, you know, have vocals on it. It's about melody. It's absolutely about melody. 18 is just, it's fast, it's furious. It's got one of those sort of almost like 60s beats. That sort of Midwestern, Americana, rock and roll. It's all in 18. Pat Metheny is able to, you know, really bring that out. And at this point, we got composition. It's Metheny, Mays and Vasconcelos writing this. We then go to Offramp, and Offramp is like an 80s synclavier exploration of sort of free jazz, harmonic jazz. Incredible. You know, the fact that people bought this album when you got tracks as approachable as 18 and then as way out as Offramp is a brilliant. And then we get another just signature tune, James, by Pat Metheny. Beautiful tune, melodic, right? And when you hear it, you just want to solo over it. I always solo over James, and it goes, you know, you solo, it's beautiful. And then you get to the next bit, and when you go to the next bit, it's just so heavy, and you can't play through it, you know. I can remember spending quite recently about 3 days trying to work out a way of negotiating, because it's not just playing the chord changes. If you try and play the chord changes, it's gobbledygook. It's so fast and the harmony is so deep, and it's ascending. I can't even sing it. All of that, if you know the tune, it's absolutely incredible. This is a great album. And then they end with this sort of quite gothic and mysterious, misty tune, The Bat, which it sounds like a bat. You can hear the bat. He's flapping. I just love this album. Right, so that's my number one. Honourable mentions, like I said, Zero Tolerance for Silence is an album I absolutely love. There's the trio albums he had with Bill Stewart, and I can't remember the bass player. They're great, but they didn't quite make the list. If I could put this on, I would. Works. That's one of the greatest Pat Metheny albums ever. And of course, this is a compilation. I think it's been put together by Pat Metheny. And it pulls from all the ECM albums. And this, for me, really was important because it had tracks off As Wichita Falls, So Falls Wichita, which I don't own, which is one of his greatest albums. It's got New Chatuaka, which is New Chitaka, sorry, which is his sort of acoustic guitar statement. Absolutely incredible. And we have a couple of tunes off 8081, which is a live album. That album, which features the incredible band, this is where Pat suddenly, for the first time, stretched out. And he's got Charlie Hayden on bass, Jack DeJohnette on drums, and Michael Brecker on saxophone. And I think Dewey Redman's also on that album as well. That's another incredible album. Travels, which came out, that live album was an incredible album. That would have to be in the mix and considered. And of course, the incredible Rejoicing, a tribute to Ornette Coleman almost, that he did with Bill Higgins on drums. I think it's a trio, and I think it's probably Charlie Hayden on bass, I feel. I used to have that album. If I still own that, that would be coming in the top 3. So, yeah, the other album I really wanted to talk about is the Orchestrion album, which he did with his sort of... and it's a separate video. He basically made an album out of these sort of robot instruments that he could control like a grand wizard. It said from his like synclavier guitar he could control, and so he could play drums and piano. And he went out on tour in this like room that looks like the the room of requirement or whatever it's called from Harry Potter, and he sat there in the middle, bobbing his head away, controlling all these robot devices. It's about the most bonkers thing that any modern mainstream musician has done. Pat Metheny's always pushed the envelope. He's one of the greatest musicians. It's not his guitar playing, it's not even his composition, it's his vision, it's the world he created, it's his absolute surrender to music. That's what Pat Metheny is to me. He surrendered his life to music. Everything is about improvised music and how that operates. And he is such an incredible musician. Absolutely incredible. The great Rick Beato, who made contact with me recently, and we had a long conversation. Now, if you listen to that conversation, it was just two music fans talking about Keith Jarrett and Pat Metheny. Rick has an absolute deep love and respect for Pat Metheny. And I understand where it's coming from. Now, I will never be the musician Rick Beato is. I will never be able to have that insight into what music is, which he has, which is why I rate him so highly as the music YouTubers. But when I spoke to him, Rick seemed to have the same feeling towards Pat, and you start to realise how high up these guys are. Pat really is one of the guys. I don't know what I can say. And that's what I wanted to try and get across on this video. He's one of the guys. It's not about my favourite albums. It's about me trying to express that Pat Metheny is there. Miles Davis, Coltrane, Duke Ellington, Louis Armstrong, Charlie Parker, Thelonious Monk, Chick Corea, John McLaughlin, Alan Holdsworth. All of these are greats. Right at the top of that, right at the top, is Pat Metheny. Right? He's Pat Metheny. Amazing. I don't know what more I could say. Going back to these albums again, which I've lived with for the past 40 years of my life, I almost forget this guy. You know, he is there. He is there in my little bag of my favourite musicians of all time. I absolutely love him. I can't express how great he is on here. And I'm sure you do all love him too. And anybody's watched this, you know all these albums. And you're about to say, this album's great, Andy, and that. I know they are. It's like, this. How many albums have he made? They're all bloody amazing. They're all masterpieces. They're all and then we forget about all the albums he's played on by other people. The debut Michael Brecker album, unbelievable. Absolutely unbelievable. I'd love to talk about albums. That album, is it called One Summer Night or One Hot? I can't remember. The album where, you know, his guitar company sent him over an acoustic guitar to try out. So he plugs it into his home recording. It's not a recording studio, it's just a direct recorder, probably a DAT. Puts a little bit of reverb on the guitar. And he just tries the guitar out and he records some stuff down. Gets up the next day, has a listen to it. He goes, well, that's not bad. I'll bang that out as an album. That album was improvised on the spot by Pat. That's the level of the guy. That's the level of Pat Metheny. Honestly, it's really hard to understand the level of a musician at that level. It's really hard to even perceive it. Why are we even talking about him? How can I even talk about this guy? I'm done. I'm finished. Stick a like on it. Subscribe. You know, check out my Patreon. Check out my PayPal tip jar. Check out the membership here. Some people are starting to put comments up saying, "Are you putting some of your videos behind a paywall?" No, I'm not. I have set up a membership, and I am making extra videos that wouldn't be there if you want them. You don't have to get them. You won't miss out if you don't. Don't worry about it. But if you want even more extra Andy, which most of you go, no, I've got enough actually, and I do understand that. But if you want a little bit extra, then you can become a member. And you can also become a member which supports me, because I am now a fully fledged YouTuber, and my kids' food is being paid for by you watching those videos, which I thank you for, which is a very precarious place to be in. But I love it, because my job is to just come on and wax lyrical about Mr. Pat Metheny. And Pat, if you are watching, well, I shouldn't really call you Pat, Mr. Metheny, if you're watching, I want to interview you so bad. I know you're not going to come on. You're too big. You're too big. I'm too lowly and you're too big. But we'll have a decent conversation. And I promise you I won't ask you all the normal questions. Not at all. I'll ask you something else that you don't expect to get asked. I think that's what I want from my interviews now. Thanks for watching this one. See you on the next one.